The whispers stopped the moment Felicity Foster stepped into the general store, replaced by a silence so thick it could choke a horse. Quinn Dawson noticed her immediately from where he stood by the counter, his hand pausing mid-reach for the tobacco he had been about to purchase. She was perhaps 23, with auburn hair pinned beneath a simple bonnet and eyes the color of honey that refused to meet anyone's gaze. Her dress was modest, clean but worn, and she carried herself with a strange mixture of dignity and defeat. The other women in the store turned their backs to her deliberately, pulling their skirts aside as if her very presence might contaminate them. Old Mrs. Henderson actually clutched her daughter's arm and steered her toward the door, muttering something Quinn could not quite hear but whose venom was unmistakable. It was September of 1876 in Gunnison, Colorado, a town carved from the wilderness where the mountains met the valleys and cattle ranchers made their fortunes or lost their shirts trying. Quinn had been coming to this town for supplies since he had purchased his ranch 3 years prior, a sprawling piece of land with good water and better grazing. At 29, he had built something substantial through hard work and careful management, something his father would have been proud of if the old man had lived long enough to see it. He was tall and broad-shouldered from years of physical labor, with dark hair and gray eyes that missed little. Felicity moved quietly to the fabric section, her fingers reaching tentatively toward a bolt of blue calico before withdrawing as if she had no right to touch it. The proprietor, Joseph Matthews, noticed her and his face hardened. He walked over with deliberate steps. "I told you last week, Miss Foster, your money is no good here. We do not serve your kind." Quinn saw her flinch as if she had been struck. Her voice when she spoke was soft but steady. "I only need thread, Mr. Matthews, just a single spool. I have the money. Did you not hear me?" Matthews's voice rose, drawing attention from the few remaining customers. "Get out of my store." Quinn found himself stepping forward before he had fully decided to intervene. "That seems unnecessarily harsh, Matthews. The lady wants to make a purchase." Matthews turned to him, his face flushed. "Mr. Dawson, I know you are fairly new to Gunnison, but you do not understand the situation. This woman is not welcome in decent establishments." "What crime has she committed?" Quinn asked, keeping his voice level. "Crime?" Matthews sputtered. "She is a fallen woman, a disgrace to all that is proper. She has no business among respectable folk." Quinn looked at Felicity, who had gone pale but held her head high. There was something in her bearing that spoke of strength rather than shame, though her hands trembled slightly as they clutched her reticule. "Sell her the thread," Quinn said quietly. "I will pay for it if her money offends you so much." "Mr. Dawson, I cannot have it known that I serve such people. It would ruin my reputation with the church ladies, who are my best customers." Quinn reached into his pocket and withdrew a gold coin, setting it on the counter with a sound that rang through the quiet store. "Give her whatever she needs. Keep the change." Matthews stared at the coin, then at Quinn, clearly torn between his prejudice and his profit. Finally, greed won. He snatched up the coin and jerked his head toward Felicity. "Make it quick." Felicity selected a single spool of black thread and moved toward the door without looking at Quinn. He followed her outside into the afternoon sunshine, catching up to her on the wooden sidewalk. "Miss Foster, wait a moment." She stopped but did not turn around immediately. When she did, he saw tears glimmering in her eyes, though none had fallen. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Dawson. I will repay you when I am able." "That is not necessary. I only wanted to make sure you were all right." A bitter smile crossed her face. "All right." "I have not been all right for a very long time, sir, but I thank you nonetheless." "What did you do that has the whole town set against you?" She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether his interest was genuine or merely the prelude to more cruelty. "I existed, Mr. Dawson. Sometimes that is crime enough." With that, she turned and walked away, her back straight despite the weight of every judgmental gaze that followed her down the street. Quinn stood there watching her go, feeling something stir in his chest that he had not felt in years. He had come to Colorado to escape the memories of the war, the blood and the screaming and the senselessness of it all. He had wanted only peace, solitude, and the simple challenges of working the land and raising cattle. But there was something about the way Felicity Foster had held herself together under such public humiliation that spoke to him. He recognized it, because he saw it in his own mirror every morning, the look of someone who had survived something that should have broken them. Over the next 2 weeks, Quinn made inquiries about Felicity Foster, though he did so carefully. What he learned painted a picture that troubled him deeply. She lived alone in a small cabin on the outskirts of town, barely scraping by with the meager income she earned from sewing and mending work that other women would not deign to do themselves. The stories about why she was shunned varied wildly. Some said she had been a prostitute in Denver before coming to Gunnison. Others claimed she had borne a child out of wedlock and abandoned it. Still others whispered darker things, tales of witchcraft and murder that were clearly nonsense but which people repeated with relish nonetheless. The one consistent element in all the stories was that no one actually seemed to know the truth. They simply knew that when Felicity had arrived in Gunnison 2 years ago, the pastor's wife had declared her unfit for decent society, and that pronouncement had been enough to seal her fate. In a small town where social standing meant everything, being marked as an outcast was a sentence worse than any court could impose. Quinn found himself thinking about her at odd moments as he worked his ranch. He thought about her when he was mending fence line in the cold morning air, his breath steaming as the sun rose over the mountains. He thought about her when he was checking on his herd, counting heads and making sure none had wandered off or fallen prey to wolves. He thought about her in the evenings when he sat alone in his house, eating a solitary dinner and reading by lamplight. He was not a man prone to loneliness. He had chosen this life deliberately, wanting distance from other people and their complications. But something about Felicity Foster had gotten under his skin. Perhaps it was the injustice of her situation, or perhaps it was simply that he recognized a kindred spirit, someone else who carried wounds that the world could not see. 3 weeks after their first encounter, Quinn rode into town with a purpose. He went directly to the small cabin where Felicity lived, a structure that had clearly seen better days. The roof needed repair, the windows were covered with oiled paper rather than glass, and the whole building leaned slightly to one side as if weary of standing upright. He dismounted and knocked on the door. There was a long silence. Then Felicity's voice came from inside. "Who is there?" "Quinn Dawson, Miss Foster. I would like to speak with you if you are willing." Another pause, then the door opened a crack. She peered out at him, her expression wary. "Mr. Dawson, I did not expect to see you again. May I come in? What I have to say is not for the whole town to hear." She hesitated, then opened the door wider. "Very well, but only for a moment. I cannot afford to damage what little reputation you might still have by association with me." The interior of the cabin was spare but clean. A narrow bed stood in one corner, covered with a quilt that showed signs of careful mending. A small table and 2 chairs occupied the center of the room, and a cast iron stove provided heat. Sewing materials were spread across the table, evidence of the work she did to survive. Despite the poverty of her surroundings, everything was neat and orderly, and there was a small vase of wildflowers on the windowsill that spoke of a spirit not yet completely broken. "I will stand, thank you," Quinn said, removing his hat. "Miss Foster, I am going to be direct because I do not see the point in dancing around what I have come to say. This town has treated you abominably, and from what I can determine, they have done so without any real knowledge of who you are or what circumstances brought you here." "That is an accurate assessment," she said carefully. "I am a rancher with a good spread and a solid income. I have no family to speak of, no ties binding me to anyone or anything except my land and my cattle. I am also aware that I am not getting any younger and that running a ranch alone is becoming more difficult as the work piles up." She watched him with growing confusion. "Mr. Dawson, I do not understand what this has to do with me." He met her eyes directly. "I am asking you to marry me, Miss Foster." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Felicity stared at him as if he had suddenly started speaking Chinese. Then she sank down onto one of the chairs, her legs apparently refusing to hold her upright any longer. "You cannot be serious," she whispered. "I am entirely serious. I have given this considerable thought. You need a home and protection from this town's persecution. I need help running my ranch and managing my household. It seems to me that we could help each other. You do not know me. You do not know what I have done or what has been done to me. You do not know why these people hate me." "Then tell me," Quinn said simply. "Tell me now and let me decide for myself." She shook her head slowly. "No. If you truly mean this proposal, if you are genuinely willing to marry me despite everything, then I will tell you on our wedding night. But not before. I will not have you look at me differently, will not endure your pity or your judgment. If you marry me knowing only what the town knows, and I will take my chances with the truth after the vows are spoken." It was Quinn's turn to be surprised. There was a strange courage in her proposition, a willingness to gamble everything on a single moment of honesty. It spoke to a kind of integrity he had not expected. "Very well," he said after a moment's consideration. "I agree to your terms, but I want you to understand something, Miss Foster. I am not a man given to changing my mind once it is made up. Whatever you tell me on our wedding night, I will hear it through and we will face it together. I am not proposing some arrangement where I hold your past over your head or use it as leverage. If we marry as equals, partners in building a life together." Tears spilled down her cheeks then, the first time he had seen her actually cry. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" "Because I have been where you are," Quinn said quietly. "Not exactly, perhaps, but close enough. I know what it is to be judged for things beyond your control. I know what it is to carry shame that is not yours to bear. And I know what it is to need someone to take a chance on you when the rest of the world has written you off." She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I will not be a real wife to you, Mr. Dawson. Not in the way that married people are. I cannot offer you that." "I am not asking for it," he replied. "At least not until and unless you choose to offer it freely. I meant what I said about being partners. Everything else can sort itself out in time." Felicity stood and walked to the window, looking out at the town that had made her life so difficult. When she turned back, her face was set with determination. "Then yes, Mr. Dawson, I will marry you, and may God have mercy on us both." The wedding took place 1 week later in the office of the Justice of the Peace, a man named Herbert Young, who performed the ceremony with a disapproving frown but a willingness to take Quinn's money nonetheless. There were no guests, no flowers, no celebration. Quinn wore his best suit, which was still somewhat worn from years of hard use. Felicity wore a simple gray dress that she had sewn herself, with a small spray of late-season wildflowers pinned to her bodice. The ceremony itself was brief and perfunctory. Quinn spoke his vows clearly and firmly, looking into Felicity's eyes as he promised to honor and cherish her. When it was her turn, her voice shook but did not break as she made the same promises in return. Justice Young pronounced them man and wife with the enthusiasm of a man reading a list of feed prices, and it was done. As they left the office, Quinn offered Felicity his arm. She took it hesitantly, and they walked together to where his wagon waited. The few people on the street stopped to stare, and the whispers began immediately. Quinn helped Felicity up onto the wagon seat and then climbed up beside her, taking the reins. Before he could signal the horses to move, Pastor Daniels appeared, striding across the street with his black coat flapping behind him like the wings of a carrion bird. He was a tall, thin man with a face that seemed permanently set in an expression of disapproval. "Mr. Dawson," he called out. "A word, if you please." Quinn looked down at him, making no move to climb down from the wagon. "Pastor, I feel it is my duty to warn you that you have made a grave mistake. That woman is not fit to be any man's wife. She has been cast out from decent society for good reason." "And what reason is that, Pastor?" Quinn asked coolly. "Because I have asked around, and no one seems to be able to tell me exactly what crime Miss Foster committed, or rather, Mrs. Dawson, as she is now." The pastor's face flushed. "There are certain things that do not need to be spoken aloud to be known. Her very presence is an offense to all that is moral and right." "In my experience," Quinn said, "people who claim things do not need to be spoken aloud are usually people who have no facts to support their accusations. If you have something specific to charge my wife with, say it now. Otherwise, step aside. You will regret this decision, Mr. Dawson. The church will not look kindly on this union. Then I suppose it is fortunate that I do not answer to your church, Pastor. Good day." Quinn snapped the reins and the wagon lurched forward. The pastor had to step back quickly to avoid being struck by the horses. As they drove out of town, Quinn could feel Felicity trembling beside him, though whether from fear, anger, or relief he could not tell. The ride to the ranch took nearly 2 hours. Quinn pointed out various landmarks along the way, trying to make conversation and ease the tension that hung between them. Felicity responded politely but briefly, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She seemed to be steeling herself for something, and Quinn found himself growing more curious about what she would reveal when they were alone. The ranch came into view as they crested a rise, and Quinn felt the usual swell of pride at the sight of it. The main house was solid timber construction with a wide porch and a stone chimney. It was not fancy, but it was well built and weathertight. Beyond the house stood a large barn, several outbuildings, and a series of corrals where his horses moved about peacefully. In the distance, he could see the dark shapes of his cattle grazing on the grassland that stretched toward the mountains. "It is beautiful," Felicity said softly, the first unprompted words she had spoken since leaving town. "It is home," Quinn replied, "and now it is your home too." He helped her down from the wagon and carried her single trunk into the house. The interior was masculine and practical, with sturdy furniture and little in the way of decoration. Quinn had always figured there was no point in prettying up a place when there was no one to see it but himself. Now, looking at it through Felicity's eyes, he wondered if she found it cold and unwelcoming. "I know it is not much," he began, but she cut him off. "It is more than I have had in a very long time, Mr. Dawson. I am grateful. You should call me Quinn. We are married now." She nodded slowly. "Quinn, then, and you should call me Felicity." "Felicity," he repeated, liking the way it sounded. "Let me show you around." He gave her a tour of the house, pointing out the kitchen with its large stove and well-stocked pantry, the sitting room with its fireplace and shelves of books, and finally the bedroom. There was only one, with a large bed that suddenly seemed to dominate the space. "I will sleep in the barn," Quinn said immediately, "or I can make up a bed in the sitting room. You should have privacy." "This is your house and your bed," Felicity protested. "I cannot turn you out of your own room." "We will figure something out," Quinn said. "For tonight the room is yours." "I insist." She looked like she wanted to argue further but simply nodded instead. The afternoon wore on, and Quinn busied himself with the endless tasks that ranch life demanded. He fed the horses, checked on the cattle in the near pasture, and mended a weak spot in the fence line. When he returned to the house as the sun was setting, he found that Felicity had prepared dinner, a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and fried salt pork. But it was hot and filling, and the first home-cooked meal he had eaten in longer than he cared to remember. They ate mostly in silence, the weight of what was to come hanging over them both. Finally, as Felicity cleared the dishes, she spoke without looking at him. "It is time I told you the truth. It is only fair that you know what you have bound yourself to." Quinn set down his coffee cup and gave her his full attention. "I am listening." Felicity dried her hands on a towel and sat down across from him at the table. She took a deep breath, and when she began speaking, her voice was steady but distant, as if she were recounting events that had happened to someone else. "5 years ago, I was engaged to be married. His name was Thomas Garrett, and he was the most wonderful man I had ever known. We grew up together in a small town in Missouri, and everyone said we were perfect for each other. We were to be married in the spring of 1872, and I thought I was the happiest woman alive." She paused, her hands twisting the towel in her lap. Quinn waited, saying nothing. That winter, there was a terrible fire in town. It started in the hotel and spread quickly because everything was so dry. Thomas was helping to fight the blaze when the building collapsed. He was trapped inside with 3 other men. Her voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. "They got the other men out, but by the time they reached Thomas, he was badly burned. They brought him to my father's house because my mother had some nursing skills." Felicity's eyes were distant now, seeing something that Quinn could not. "He lived for 3 days. 3 days of agony such as I hope never to witness again. He was burned over most of his body, and there was nothing anyone could do except give him laudanum and pray. I stayed by his side the entire time, holding his hand when he could bear to be touched, talking to him, singing to him, trying to ease his suffering in any way I could." Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice remained steady. "On the 3rd night, he was in such pain that he could barely breathe. The doctor had given us all the laudanum we had and said there was nothing more he could do. Thomas begged me to help him. He said he could not endure another moment, that the pain was beyond bearing. He asked me to end his suffering." Quinn felt something cold settle in his stomach as he began to understand where this story was going. "I loved him," Felicity whispered. "I loved him more than my own life, and I could not stand to see him suffer so I gave him what he asked for. I gave him more laudanum than anyone should take. I held his hand and told him I loved him, and I watched him slip away peacefully, without pain, for the first time in days." She looked up at Quinn then, her face wet with tears. "I murdered the man I loved because he asked me to. The doctor suspected what I had done, though he never said anything directly. But my mother knew. She saw how much laudanum was gone. She told the pastor, and the pastor told his wife, and soon everyone knew. They said I was a murderess, a woman who had killed her own intended husband. They said I could not be trusted, that I had a darkness in me that might claim anyone who got too close." "Felicity," Quinn began, but she held up her hand. "Please, let me finish. My family was ostracized along with me. My father lost his business. My younger sister could not find anyone willing to court her. I realized that as long as I stayed, I was destroying the people I loved. So I left. I went to Denver first, but somehow the story followed me. People have a way of finding out these things. I worked wherever I could, doing whatever I could, but eventually I would always have to move on. When I came to Gunnison, I thought perhaps I had finally gone far enough that no one would know. But the pastor's wife was originally from Missouri, from a town not far from where I grew up. She recognized my name and wrote to people back home to confirm her suspicions. After that, I was finished in Gunnison too. She met Quinn's eyes directly. So now you know. I killed a man, Quinn. The man I loved more than anything in the world. I understand if you cannot abide being married to me. I understand if you want me to leave. I will go quietly and cause you no trouble, but I wanted you to know the truth as I promised. Quinn sat in silence for a long moment, processing what he had heard. He looked at Felicity, at her tear-stained face and her hands that twisted nervously in her lap, and he thought about the courage it must have taken to tell him this story. He thought about what it must have been like to watch the man she loved suffer, to make the choice she had made, to live with the consequences every day since. Then, to Felicity's obvious shock, Quinn Dawson wept. He did not sob or wail, but tears ran freely down his weathered face as he reached across the table and took both of her hands in his. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Felicity, I am not crying because I am horrified by what you did. I am crying because I understand it in a way that few others could. During the war, I was a field medic. I saw men suffering from wounds that no human being should have to endure. I saw boys, and they were boys, some of them no more than 16, dying slow, agonizing deaths from infection and gangrene and blood loss. And more than once, when I knew there was no hope, when I could see that all that awaited them was hours or days of unbearable pain, I made the same choice you did." Felicity's eyes widened in shock. "I gave them more morphine than regulation allowed," Quinn continued. "I held their hands and I lied to them, told them they were going home, told them their suffering was almost over. And I watched them slip away peacefully, which was the only mercy I had left to give them. I have carried the weight of those decisions ever since. I have wondered if I was a murderer or a mercy giver, if I damned my soul, or did the only decent thing I could do in an indecent situation." He squeezed her hands gently. "What you did was not murder, Felicity. What you did was an act of love and mercy. You put Thomas's suffering above your own welfare, knowing full well what the consequences would be. That does not make you a monster. It makes you one of the bravest people I have ever known." Felicity was crying in earnest now, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Quinn came around the table and pulled her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her and letting her cry against his chest. She clung to him as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had been trying to sweep her away for years. "I have been so alone," she sobbed. "So alone for so long." "You are not alone anymore," Quinn said firmly. "You have me, and I am not going anywhere. We will face whatever comes together." They stood there in the kitchen for a long time, holding each other as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear outside the window. When Felicity finally pulled back, she looked up at Quinn with something new in her eyes, not just gratitude, but the first tentative stirrings of hope. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for understanding. Thank you for not turning away." "There is nothing to thank me for," Quinn replied. "You are my wife, and I meant every word of my vows. For better or worse, in sickness and health, until death parts us. I do not say things I do not mean." That night, Quinn did sleep in the sitting room, making up a pallet on the floor near the fireplace. But for the first time since he had returned from the war, He slept deeply and peacefully, untroubled by the nightmares that usually plagued him. And in the bedroom, Felicity slept in a real bed with clean sheets and locked doors, safe for the first time in years. The next morning began the work of building a life together. Quinn woke early, as was his habit, and had breakfast started before Felicity emerged from the bedroom. She looked surprised to find him cooking, and more surprised still when he handed her a cup of coffee and a plate of fried eggs and bacon. "You do not need to do that," she protested. "Cooking is my responsibility now." "Cooking is whoever gets to it first's responsibility," Quinn replied. "I've been taking care of myself for a long time, Felicity. I do not expect you to wait on me hand and foot. We are partners, remember." She smiled at that, a genuine smile that transformed her face and made her look years younger. "Partners," she repeated, as if testing the word. "I think I like the sound of that." Over the following weeks, they settled into a routine. Felicity took over much of the household management, which freed Quinn to focus more on the ranch work. But she also insisted on learning about the ranch itself, accompanying him on his rounds and asking questions about everything from cattle breeding to fence maintenance. Quinn found himself enjoying the company and the conversation. It had been so long since he had anyone to talk to that he had forgotten how pleasant it could be to share thoughts and ideas with another person. Felicity proved to be a quick learner and a hard worker. She helped him with the autumn preparations, putting up vegetables from the garden, salting meat for the winter, and ensuring they had adequate supplies laid in before the snow came. She mended his clothes and the ranch linens, fixed up the house with small touches that made it more welcoming, and even learned to ride a horse so she could be more useful around the property. For her part, Felicity seemed to blossom in her new environment. Away from the constant judgment and hostility of town, she relaxed and showed more of her true personality. She was intelligent and funny, with a dry wit that caught Quinn off guard and made him laugh more than he had in years. She sang while she worked, old folk songs and hymns that filled the house with music. And she was kind, always thinking of small ways to make life easier or more pleasant for both of them. The physical distance between them remained, however. They slept in separate rooms and were careful not to intrude on each other's privacy. But there was a growing emotional intimacy that Quinn found both comforting and slightly terrifying. He had not allowed himself to care deeply about anyone since the war, afraid of the pain that caring inevitably brought. But Felicity was slipping past his defenses without even trying, and he found he did not want to stop her. One evening in late October, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Felicity set aside her mending and looked at Quinn with a serious expression. "I need to go into town," she said quietly. "We are running low on supplies, and while I know you usually make the trip, I think it is time I face those people again." Quinn frowned. "There is no need for you to subject yourself to their cruelty. I can go." "No," Felicity said firmly. "I cannot hide out here forever, Quinn. I am your wife now, which gives me a standing in this community whether they like it or not. If I am going to make a life here, I need to hold my head up and refuse to be cowed by their judgment. They will not make it easy for you, I know, but I will not be alone this time. I will have you beside me." Quinn considered this, then nodded slowly. "All right, but we go together, and if anyone treats you with disrespect, we leave immediately. I will not stand by and watch you be abused." "Fair enough." They made the trip to town 2 days later. As they drove down the main street in Quinn's wagon, people stopped and stared. The whispering started immediately, and Quinn could see the shock on many faces. Clearly, word of their marriage had spread, but people had not quite believed it until they saw the evidence with their own eyes. They stopped first at the general store, where Joseph Matthews stood behind the counter with the same sour expression he always wore. When he saw Felicity enter with Quinn, his face darkened. "Mr. Dawson, I must protest," he began, but Quinn cut him off. "My wife and I need supplies, Matthews. We have a list and we have money. I suggest you simply do your job." "Your wife," Matthews repeated, making the word sound like a curse. "So the rumors are true. You actually married that woman." "I married Felicity Foster Dawson, yes," Quinn said levelly. "And I will thank you to speak of her with respect or not at all." Other customers in the store were watching now, including several of the church ladies who had been most vocal in their condemnation of Felicity. One of them, a woman named Martha Hopkins, stepped forward with a sniff of disapproval. "Mr. Dawson, surely you understand that decent people cannot simply ignore what this woman has done. She is a murderess and has no place among respectable folk." Felicity spoke up before Quinn could respond, her voice clear and steady. "Mrs. Hopkins, I have never claimed to be perfect. I made a choice that I believe to be the right one under terrible circumstances, and I have paid for that choice every day since. But I am tired of being judged by people who have never faced such a decision themselves. You have no idea what you would do if someone you loved was suffering unbearably and begging you for mercy." "I would trust in the Lord's timing," Mrs. Hopkins said primly. "I would not take matters into my own hands and play God." "How convenient for you," Felicity replied, her voice hardening slightly, "that you can be so certain of your righteousness when you have never been tested. I wonder if your faith would hold up quite so well if you were the one watching someone you loved die by inches." "How dare you, Mrs. Hopkins began, but another voice cut through the tension. "She dares because she is right." Everyone turned to see Dr. Samuel Mitchell standing in the doorway of the store. He was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes, the only doctor within 50 miles of Gunnison. He walked into the store and looked directly at Mrs. Hopkins. "I have been listening to this town condemn Felicity Dawson for 2 years now, and I have had enough. What she did was an act of mercy, not murder. I have been a doctor for 30 years, and I have seen more suffering than any of you could imagine. There are times when the kindest thing a person can do is to ease another's passing. Thomas Garrett was going to die, and he was going to die in agony. Mrs. Dawson gave him peace. That takes a kind of courage that most people do not possess. But the Bible says," Mrs. Hopkins started. "The Bible says a great many things," Dr. Mitchell interrupted. "It also says to judge not, lest ye be judged. It says blessed are the merciful. It says to love your neighbor as yourself. This town has done none of those things where Mrs. Dawson is concerned. You have condemned her without knowing her, shunned her without offering her any chance at redemption, and made her life a living hell because it made you feel righteous. Well, I for one am ashamed to be part of such a community." The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Hopkins's face was red with embarrassment and anger. She turned on her heel and marched out of the store, and several other women followed her. But a few remained, looking uncertain and perhaps a bit ashamed. Dr. Mitchell turned to Felicity and Quinn. "I apologize for not speaking up sooner, Mrs. Dawson. I should have defended you long ago, but I am a coward who did not want to lose his patience. I hope you can forgive me." Felicity's eyes were bright with tears. "There is nothing to forgive, Dr. Mitchell. Thank you for your kind words." The doctor nodded and left. Matthews, looking thoroughly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. "Your list, Mr. Dawson." Quinn handed it over, and they completed their business in relative silence. As they loaded their supplies into the wagon, several people approached them not to criticize, but to offer tentative greetings and even a few apologies. It was not a complete victory, but it was a start. On the ride home, Felicity was quiet, lost in thought. Finally, she turned to Quinn with a soft smile. "Thank you for standing by me. I know it cannot be easy, being married to someone with my reputation." "Your reputation is undeserved," Quinn said firmly. "And even if it were not, you are my wife and I am proud to stand beside you. The people who matter will come to see the truth. The ones who do not can go to hell." Felicity laughed, a light sound that made Quinn's heart lift. "Such language, Mr. Dawson." "I am a rancher, Mrs. Dawson. We are not known for our delicate sensibilities." As winter settled in over the ranch, Quinn and Felicity grew even closer. The long evenings spent by the fire gave them time to talk, to share stories of their pasts, to learn each other's quirks and preferences. Quinn told her about his childhood on a farm in Ohio, about his parents who had died of fever when he was 20, about the war and the things he had seen that still haunted him. Felicity told him about growing up in Missouri, about her family whom she missed terribly, about Thomas and the life they had planned together. They also talked about lighter things, books they had read, places they wanted to see someday, plans for improving the ranch. Felicity had ideas about starting a vegetable garden in the spring, maybe getting some chickens and a cow for fresh milk and eggs. Quinn talked about expanding his herd, about breeding horses which commanded better prices than cattle. The physical space between them began to narrow, almost without them noticing. Felicity would rest her hand on Quinn's shoulder as she poured his coffee. Quinn would help her with her coat and let his hands linger a moment longer than necessary. They sat closer together on the settee, their shoulders touching as they read in the evenings. Small touches, casual intimacies, but each one building on the last until the air between them seemed charged with possibility. It was Christmas Eve when things finally came to a head. They had spent the day preparing a feast, working together in the kitchen to create the kind of meal neither of them would have bothered with if they had been alone. There was a roasted chicken, potatoes, vegetables, fresh bread, and even a pie that Felicity had made with the last of the dried apples. After dinner, they sat by the fire, full and content. Quinn had even splurged on a bottle of decent whiskey, and they each had a glass, sipping slowly and watching the flames dance. "This is the best Christmas I have had in years," Felicity said softly. "Thank you, Quinn. Thank you for giving me a home and a chance at a real life." "Thank you for agreeing to share that life with me," Quinn replied. "I did not realize how lonely I had become until you were here to ease that loneliness." Felicity set down her glass and turned to face him fully. "Quinn, I need to tell you something. When I married you, I said I could not be a real wife to you. I said I could not offer you that kind of intimacy. But I have been thinking, and I wonder if perhaps I was wrong." Quinn's heart began to beat faster, but he kept his voice calm. "You do not owe me anything, Felicity. What we have now is more than enough for me. But is it what you want? Or is it simply what you have resigned yourself to?" He looked at her for a long moment, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes, the hope and the fear mingled together. "What I want," he said slowly, "is for you to be happy. If what we have now makes you happy, then I am content. If you want something more, something different, then I want that too. But only if it is what you truly want, not what you think you owe me or what you think I expect." "I think," Felicity said carefully, "that I might be falling in love with you. I did not think it was possible. After Thomas died, I thought that part of me died with him. But these past months with you have shown me that the heart is more resilient than I knew. You have been kind to me, Quinn. You have been patient and understanding and good. And somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking of you as just my husband in name and started thinking of you as my partner, my friend, and perhaps something more." Quinn reached out and took her hand. "I have been falling in love with you since the day I saw you in that store, standing tall even as everyone around you tried to make you small. I did not understand it at the time. I told myself I was just being a decent human being, helping someone in need. But the truth is that I saw something in you that called to something in me. We are kindred spirits, you and I. We have both done hard things and carried heavy burdens. We have both been judged unfairly by people who could never understand. And I think we could be very happy together if you are willing to take that chance. Felicity smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. I am willing, Quinn. I am very willing. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and kissed her gently. It was a soft kiss, tentative and sweet, full of promise rather than demand. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "So," Quinn said, his voice slightly rough, "does this mean I do not have to sleep on the floor in the sitting room anymore?" Felicity laughed and stood, tugging him to his feet. "It means, husband of mine, that it is time we started acting like the married couple we are supposed to be." They went to the bedroom together, closing the door on the rest of the world. What happened there was private and tender, a joining not just of bodies but of souls that had been lonely for too long. They learned each other slowly, with patience and care, building something beautiful out of the broken pieces each of them carried. Winter gave way to spring, and the ranch came alive with new growth. Felicity planted her garden, nurturing seedlings with the same care she brought to everything she did. The chickens she had wanted arrived, a dozen hens and a rooster who strutted around the barnyard like he owned the place. Quinn expanded his herd, making careful purchases that would strengthen his breeding stock. They made more trips to town as the weather improved, and each time it became a little easier. Dr. Mitchell's defense of Felicity had shifted public opinion, or at least made people more cautious about expressing their condemnation openly. Some people remained hostile, but others began to thaw, offering tentative greetings and even the occasional invitation to social events. Felicity handled it all with grace, never gloating over those who had treated her poorly, never holding grudges. She simply went about her business with quiet dignity, proving through her actions that she was a good person worthy of respect. One day in April, as Quinn was working on repairing the barn door, a rider came up the road to the ranch. Quinn did not recognize the horse, but as the rider drew closer, he felt his stomach tighten with apprehension. The man was well dressed in a suit that marked him as someone from back east, and he had the look of someone on official business. "Can I help you?" Quinn called out as the man dismounted. "I am looking for Mrs. Felicity Dawson," the man said. "I was told in town that she lives here." "She does." "I am her husband, Quinn Dawson. What is your business with my wife?" "My name is Charles Foster. I am Felicity's brother." Quinn stared at him in shock. Felicity had mentioned her family, but always with such sadness that he had assumed contact with them had been severed completely. Before he could respond, the front door of the house opened and Felicity stepped out. She froze when she saw her brother, her face going white. "Charlie," she whispered. "Hello, Lissy," her brother said, using what must have been a childhood nickname. "I've been looking for you for a very long time." Felicity did not move, just stood on the porch with her hand pressed to her chest. Quinn walked over and put a steadying hand on her back. "It is all right," he murmured. "I am here." Charles Foster looked between them, his expression softening. "I did not come here to cause trouble, Lissy. I came to find you because I need to tell you something. Our mother is dying. She has asked for you. She wants to see you before she goes." Felicity made a small sound of distress. "Mother, but she disowned me. She told me never to come home." "She was wrong," Charles said bluntly. "We were all wrong. It took us too long to realize it, but we did eventually. Father especially has been beside himself. He never wanted you to leave, Lissy. Mother pushed for it because she thought it was what was best for the family, but it nearly broke him." And now that mother is dying, she cannot rest until she has made peace with you. She wants to apologize, wants to ask your forgiveness." Tears were streaming down Felicity's face. "Is she very ill?" "The doctor says she has perhaps a few weeks left, maybe a month if she is strong." "I know it is a long journey back to Missouri, but if you can come, I think it would mean everything to her, and to the rest of us." Felicity looked at Quinn helplessly. He squeezed her hand. "We will go," he said firmly. "Of course we will go. Your mother needs you and you need this closure." "But the ranch," Felicity began, "can survive without me for a few weeks. I will ask Tom Patterson from the neighboring spread to keep an eye on things. This is more important." Charles Foster looked at Quinn with undisguised gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson. I can see my sister has found herself a good man." They left 3 days later, after Quinn had made arrangements for the ranch and packed enough supplies for the long journey. Charles accompanied them, and during the trip, he filled them in on everything that had happened with the family since Felicity had left. Their father's business had not recovered fully from the scandal, but it had survived. Felicity's younger sister, Sarah, had eventually married a good man who did not care about the family's tarnished reputation. There was now a nephew Felicity had never met, a boy named after their father. The family had been searching for Felicity for over a year, hiring investigators to track her movements, trying to find her so they could bring her home. "We should have defended you from the start," Charles said quietly one evening as they sat around their campfire. "We should have stood by you instead of letting the town drive you away. Mother knows that now, and it is eating her alive. She needs to make this right before she dies." "I did what I did," Felicity said. "I do not regret it, even knowing the cost. Thomas was suffering, and I had the power to ease that suffering. I would make the same choice again." "I know," Charles said. "And that is exactly what I told Mother. You did what you thought was right, and you paid a terrible price for it. The least we can do is acknowledge that and tell you we are sorry for how we treated you." The journey took 2 weeks of hard travel. When they finally arrived in the small Missouri town where Felicity had grown up, it was late evening. The family home was a modest but well-kept house on the edge of town, with a white picket fence and a garden that was just beginning to bloom. Felicity's father, Richard Foster, was waiting on the porch. When he saw her, he let out a cry and rushed down the steps, pulling her into a fierce embrace. He was thinner than Felicity remembered, with more gray in his hair, but his strength was undiminished. "My girl," he sobbed. "My beautiful girl. I am so sorry, Lissy. I am so sorry for everything." "Papa," Felicity cried, hugging him back just as tightly. "I have missed you so much." Quinn stood back, giving them space to reunite. Eventually, Felicity's father pulled back and looked at Quinn with wet eyes. "You must be the man who married my daughter. Charles told me about you in his letters. Thank you for taking care of her when we could not." "It has been my honor," Quinn said simply. They went inside, where Felicity was reunited with her sister and met her nephew for the first time. But the joy of the reunion was tempered by the knowledge of why she had come. Her mother, Rebecca Foster, lay in the main bedroom, wasted by the cancer that was slowly killing her. Rebecca wept when Felicity entered the room. She reached out with a trembling hand and Felicity took it, kneeling beside the bed. "Forgive me," Rebecca whispered. "Please forgive me for what I did to you. I was wrong, so wrong. I let fear and pride rule me instead of love. I drove away my own daughter when she needed me most. I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I am begging for it anyway." "There is nothing to forgive, Mother," Felicity said through her tears. "You did what you thought was right. We all did what we thought was right, and I am here now. That is all that matters." They stayed for 3 weeks. Rebecca Foster held on longer than the doctor had predicted, as if she needed that time to truly make peace with her daughter. They talked for hours each day, when Rebecca was strong enough. She told Felicity how proud she was of the woman she had become, how brave she had been to endure what she had endured. She approved wholeheartedly of Quinn, declaring him to be exactly the kind of man Felicity deserved. Quinn spent the time getting to know Felicity's family. He liked them, especially her father, who reminded him in some ways of his own father. They were good people who had made a mistake born of fear and societal pressure, but who had ultimately found the courage to admit they were wrong. Rebecca Foster died peacefully one morning with her family gathered around her bed. Felicity held her hand as she slipped away, and though she grieved, there was also a sense of closure and peace. She had been able to say goodbye, had been able to hear her mother's apology and offer her own forgiveness. It was more than many people got. They stayed for the funeral and for a few days after, helping the family settle affairs. Before they left, Felicity's father pulled Quinn aside. "I want to thank you again for what you have done for my daughter," Richard said. "I know the circumstances of your marriage were unconventional, but I can see that you truly love her. That is all a father can ask for his child." "I do love her," Quinn said. "More than I ever thought I could love anyone. She saved me just as much as I saved her, perhaps more. We were both lost and we found each other." Richard smiled and clasped Quinn's hand. "Then you have my blessing and my gratitude. Take care of her, always." The journey back to Colorado was easier than the journey out, despite the grief Felicity carried. She had her family back, in a sense. They would write letters now, would stay in touch. The breach had been healed, even if the years of separation could not be undone. When they finally came within sight of the ranch, Felicity let out a sigh of relief and happiness. "I am home," she said simply. "Yes," Quinn agreed. "We are home." Life settled back into its comfortable rhythm. Summer came, and with it the endless work of maintaining a ranch. But there was also joy in that work, satisfaction in seeing the fruits of their labor. The garden flourished under Felicity's care, producing more vegetables than they could eat. They had to preserve the surplus, filling jars with pickles and tomatoes and beans that would sustain them through the next winter. The cattle thrived on the good grass and plentiful water. Quinn's careful breeding program was beginning to show results, with calves that were larger and healthier than before. He was even able to sell a few head at a significant profit, money that would help them expand further. In town, Felicity's standing continued to improve. Dr. Mitchell had become a good friend, often stopping by the ranch for dinner and conversation. Other families began to follow his lead, cautiously at first, but then with more warmth. Felicity was invited to join the sewing circle, then the church choir. It was not universal acceptance. There were still some who would never forgive her. But it was enough. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Felicity took Quinn's hand. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice nervous but happy. "What is it?" "I am with child. I am going to have a baby." Quinn stared at her for a moment, the words not quite processing. Then joy flooded through him, so intense it almost hurt. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "A baby," he repeated wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Felicity asked. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Quinn said. "I am overjoyed. I am terrified. I am so grateful I cannot find words for it." They laughed and cried together, holding each other as the stars began to appear overhead. A baby. A child of their own. It seemed almost too good to be true, and yet it was real. The pregnancy was not easy. Felicity was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep food down. Quinn worried constantly, hovering over her and driving her slightly mad with his concern. But as time went on and she grew stronger, his worry eased. Dr. Mitchell stopped by regularly to check on her and declared that everything was progressing normally. They spent the winter preparing for the baby's arrival. Quinn built a cradle out of oak, sanding it smooth and carving a pattern of vines and flowers into the headboard. Felicity sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small they were. They argued good-naturedly about names, finally settling on Thomas for a boy and Rebecca for a girl, honoring the people they had lost but who would live on in memory. The baby came on a cold February night in 1878, arriving with the kind of drama that would define his personality. Felicity's labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. Quinn stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her face with a cool cloth, feeling utterly helpless in the face of her pain. When the baby finally arrived, Quinn heard the most beautiful sound he had ever heard, the sharp, indignant wail of his son announcing his arrival into the world. Dr. Mitchell wrapped the baby in a clean blanket and handed him to Felicity, who looked exhausted but radiant. "A boy," she said softly. "A beautiful, perfect boy. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world." Quinn looked down at his son, at the tiny red face and the little fists that waved in the air, and felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. This was his child, his and Felicity's. A life they had created together, a future they had built from the ashes of their broken pasts. "He is perfect," Quinn whispered, touching one tiny hand with his finger. The baby's fist closed around it reflexively, holding tight. "Absolutely perfect." The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Thomas was not an easy baby, demanding constant attention and frequently waking in the night. But Quinn and Felicity shared the burden equally, taking turns walking the floor with him and changing his diapers and soothing his cries. They were a family now, something neither of them had ever truly expected to have. And as Quinn watched Felicity nurse their son, singing softly to him in the lamplight, he thought about how far they had both come. From outcasts and broken souls to this moment of perfect domesticity, it seemed like a miracle. Spring came again, and with it the endless cycle of ranch work. But now there was a new element to their lives, a small boy who grew stronger and more curious with each passing day. Thomas learned to crawl, then to pull himself up on furniture. He took his first steps on a warm June day, stumbling across the sitting room into his father's waiting arms. More years passed, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy with his mother's auburn hair and his father's gray eyes. When he was 3, Felicity became pregnant again, and they welcomed a daughter whom they named Sarah, after Felicity's sister. 2 years after that came another boy, whom they named after Quinn's father. The ranch prospered. Quinn's reputation as a careful breeder and honest businessman spread, and he was able to command good prices for his stock. They built additions onto the house to accommodate their growing family, adding rooms and a larger kitchen. The garden expanded, and Felicity's chickens multiplied until they had enough eggs not just for themselves but to sell in town. In town, the transformation was complete. Felicity was no longer the shunned woman but Mrs. Dawson, the rancher's wife, a respected member of the community. She taught Sunday school at the church and organized charity drives for families in need. People who had once crossed the street to avoid her now sought her out for advice and friendship. Pastor Daniels, who had been so quick to condemn her, actually came to the ranch one day to apologize. He was an older man now, his fire dimmed by age and perhaps by wisdom gained through experience. He admitted that he had judged her harshly without knowing all the facts, that he had let prejudice cloud his Christian duty to show mercy and compassion. Felicity accepted his apology with grace, though Quinn noticed she never became particularly close to him. The years were not without hardship. There were droughts that tested their resources and harsh winters that killed livestock. There were illnesses and accidents, moments of fear when one of the children ran a high fever or took a bad fall. But they weathered it all together, drawing strength from their partnership and their love. When Thomas was 10, Felicity's father came to visit. He was an old man now, but still spry, and he delighted in meeting his grandchildren. He stayed for a month, helping around the ranch and telling stories of Felicity's childhood that made her laugh and the children listen wide-eyed. Before he left, Richard took Quinn aside one last time. "I came here to see my daughter one more time before I die," he said bluntly, "to make sure she truly was as happy as her letters claimed, and I can see that she is. You have given her a good life, Quinn Dawson. You have given her everything she deserved and was denied for so long. Thank you for that." "She gave me just as much," Quinn replied. "She gave me a reason to live instead of just existing. She gave me a family and a purpose and a love I never thought I would have. I am the lucky one." Richard smiled and clasped his shoulder. "Then you are both lucky, and that is the best any of us can hope for." More years passed, and the children grew. Thomas developed a love for horses and had a natural gift for training them. Sarah inherited her mother's skill with a needle and her father's head for business, a combination that served her well. The youngest, William, was quiet and thoughtful, preferring books to physical labor, but never shirking his responsibilities. Quinn and Felicity grew older together, their hair graying and their bodies showing the wear of hard work and good living. But their love only deepened with time, seasoned by shared experience and tested by life's challenges. They still sat on the porch together in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over the mountains, marveling at how much had changed since that day in the general store so many years ago. One evening, when Quinn was 53 and Felicity was 47, they sat together watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Thomas had married a local girl named Emily and had given them 2 grandchildren already, with another on the way. Sarah was engaged to a young man who owned a freight business in Denver. William was studying to be a teacher, determined to bring education to the rural communities of Colorado. "Did you ever imagine," Felicity asked softly, "that we would end up here, with all of this?" "Never," Quinn admitted. "When I saw you in that store, being treated so cruelly, I only thought to help. I did not imagine falling in love. I did not imagine a family or grandchildren or this life we have built together. I am glad you helped me that day. I am glad you were brave enough to marry a woman everyone said was cursed." "You were never cursed," Quinn said firmly. "You were a woman who made a hard choice born of love and paid an unfair price for it. But you survived, and you became stronger for it. Just as I survived the war and became stronger. We were both broken in our own ways, Felicity, but we healed each other." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors. The mountains stood eternal in the distance, witnesses to all the small dramas of human life that played out in their shadow. Somewhere in those mountains, Quinn thought, there were other broken people trying to survive, trying to find their way. He hoped they would be as lucky as he and Felicity had been, to find someone who saw past the surface to the person underneath. The years continued to roll by. Quinn and Felicity celebrated their 25th anniversary with a large party that brought together people from all over the region. It was a far cry from their small, private wedding, with music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. Quinn stood at one point and looked around at all the faces: friends, family, neighbors, Even a few people who had once shunned Felicity but had long since changed their minds and felt a deep sense of contentment. That night, as they lay in bed together, Felicity turned to him with a soft smile. 25 years, Quinn. Can you believe it? Some days I still feel like that young man in the general store trying to figure out how to help a woman in trouble. Other days I feel ancient, like I have lived a dozen lifetimes. We have lived a full life, Felicity agreed. We have loved and been loved. We have raised good children who are raising good children of their own. We have built something lasting. Not everyone can say that. No, Quinn agreed. Not everyone can. They were silent for a moment, then Felicity spoke again. I want you to know that I have never regretted marrying you, not for a single moment. You saved me, Quinn, in every way a person can be saved. And you saved me, Quinn replied, pulling her close. We saved each other. That is what love does. As they drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Quinn reflected on the strange path that had brought them to this moment. A chance encounter in a general store. A marriage of convenience that became something so much more. A love story born from two broken people who found the courage to take a chance on each other. The Wild West was a hard land, unforgiving of weakness and slow to offer second chances. But sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, it allowed for redemption. It allowed for healing. It allowed for love to bloom in the most unlikely places. Quinn and Felicity Dawson had been lucky. They had been brave, and they had found their happily ever after, not in spite of their pasts, but because of them. Every scar they carried had taught them something. Every hardship had made them stronger, and every moment of suffering had been redeemed by the joy they found in each other. Years later, when Quinn was in his 60s, he still worked the ranch, though his sons and sons-in-law had taken over most of the heavy labor. He spent his days checking on things, offering advice, and playing with his grandchildren when they came to visit. Felicity still kept her garden and still sang while she worked, though her voice was thinner now and her movements slower. One afternoon, as Quinn was sitting on the porch watching the clouds drift across the sky, Thomas came and sat beside him. The boy, though he was hardly a boy anymore, being nearly 30 with a family of his own, was quiet for a moment before speaking. "Pa, can I ask you something?" "Of course, son. I have been thinking lately about how you and Ma met, about how you married her when everyone in town had turned their backs on her. That took a lot of courage, or a lot of foolishness," Quinn said with a smile. "Sometimes it is hard to tell the difference." "I think it was courage, and I think it taught me something important about what kind of man I want to be. You did not care what people thought. You just did what was right. That is the kind of father I want to be for my children." Quinn felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Your mother taught me as much as I taught her, Thomas. Maybe more. She showed me that strength is not about never falling down. It is about getting back up after you have been knocked down. She showed me that mercy is not weakness but the highest form of strength. And she showed me that love is not about perfection, but about choosing each other every single day, even when it is hard." Thomas nodded slowly. "I hope I can have what you and Ma have." "You can. It takes work and patience and a willingness to forgive both yourself and your partner. But it is possible. Your mother and I are proof of that." When Felicity called them in for dinner, Quinn stood and put a hand on his son's shoulder. "Come on, let us go eat before your mother comes out here with a wooden spoon." Thomas laughed, and they went inside together, into the warmth and light of the house that Quinn and Felicity had built, filled with the people they loved most in the world. The final years of their lives were peaceful. They watched their grandchildren grow and welcomed great-grandchildren. They saw Colorado change and grow, watched as the wild frontier became more settled and civilized. The railroad came through, bringing new opportunities and new challenges. Towns that had been rough camps became real communities with schools and libraries and law enforcement. Through it all, Quinn and Felicity remained constants, pillars of their community, examples of what love and partnership could accomplish. People spoke of them with respect and affection, and the story of how they met became a local legend, told and retold with varying degrees of accuracy, but always with the same message. Love can be found in the most unexpected places if you are brave enough to reach for it. Quinn died first, on a warm summer evening when he was 73 years old. He had been out checking on the horses, something he still insisted on doing despite everyone's protests that he should rest more. He simply sat down against a fence post to rest for a moment and did not get up again. When Thomas found him an hour later, he looked peaceful, as if he had simply fallen asleep. Felicity grieved deeply but not bitterly. They had had 47 years together, which was more than many people got. She had loved him and been loved by him, and that was enough. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories and passing on the wisdom she had accumulated over a long and sometimes difficult life. On the day she died, she was sitting in her favorite chair on the porch, the one where she and Quinn had sat together so many evenings. Sarah was with her, and they had been talking about nothing in particular: the weather, the grandchildren, what to plant in the garden next spring. Felicity suddenly stopped mid-sentence and smiled, looking at something Sarah could not see. "Quinn," she said softly, "I have been waiting for you." And then she was gone, slipping away as peacefully as her husband had, ready to be reunited with the man who had given her back her life so many years before. They buried her next to Quinn on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains they had both loved so much. The whole community turned out for the funeral, people from Gunnison and beyond, all come to pay their respects to a woman who had been shunned and rejected, but who had ultimately triumphed through sheer force of character and the power of love. On her gravestone, beneath her name and the dates of her birth and death, Thomas had ordered a simple inscription: "She was brave in the face of cruelty, gentle in the face of judgment, and loved beyond measure by all who truly knew her." The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations. Thomas and his sons, and eventually his grandsons, worked the land that Quinn had claimed and built into something substantial. They expanded and modernized, adapting to changing times while holding on to the core values that Quinn and Felicity had established. And on summer evenings, when the work was done, and the family gathered on the porch to watch the sun set over the mountains, they would tell the story of their great-great-grandparents. They would tell about a rancher who had married a woman shunned by the whole town, and how on their wedding night she had explained why and he had wept. They would tell about how two broken people had found each other and built something beautiful from the ruins of their pasts. It became a story about courage and compassion, about standing up for what is right even when it costs you something, about the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. It became a reminder that everyone has a story, that judgment without understanding is cruelty, and that mercy is always the right choice. And though Quinn and Felicity had been gone for many years, their love story lived on, inspiring new generations to be brave, to be kind, and to believe in the possibility of redemption and happily ever after, even in the hardest of times and the wildest of places. The land they had loved continued to thrive. The mountains stood eternal, and somewhere in the hearts of their descendants, the memory of their love remained vivid and real, a testament to what two people could accomplish when they refused to let the world break them, and instead chose to build something beautiful together.